if you're a beginner or even if you're an intermediate and you've never really had a coaching session before, you can often feel a little bit lost. When I watch other people play tennis, that can often help me think better about how I'm playing tennis. The average across the UK is about $7.50 an hour.
As you progress, then you naturally yourself have a better idea of what you might need to work on.
Make sure that the coach does not give you too many different options.
Combining lessons with practice is the quickest way to improve. Welcome back to the Get Your Grip podcast. How can you get the most out of your coaching? That is what we're going to be discussing today. So we're going to be talking about the group coaching aspect of it and also the individual coaching aspect of it, the costs associated with it, and how do you get the most bang for your buck, shall we say. So Merlin's going to take it away from here, and we're going to dive into these topics and hopefully give you some value with your coaching.
Absolutely, and we're trying to give you value with getting the most of the value you can out of a coaching session. I think it's one of the most important things you can learn. So we're going to start off and just talk about what to expect when you turn up to a particular coaching session. Take that be a group, then we'll have a little look at the individuals, and then we'll give you some tips and tricks from us seasoned coaches about the people we recognize as knowing what they're doing when they turn up for a coaching session. Because if you're a beginner or even if you're an intermediate and you've never really had a coaching session before, you can often feel a little bit lost. And that is our job as coaches, to take you through it, to guide you to playing better tennis, to play that game in a more improved way. But you can certainly take charge, and it does pay dividends if you can do that. Anyway, let's start off with group coaching sessions. So we often have different formats for these. I know that the ones that I coach and the ones that Ben coaches in our different clubs, in our different countries, they often tend to be vastly different in format. So, Ben, you were telling me about sort of half-hour sessions. I thought that was a bit weird, but just talk us through that.
Yeah, so like you, I was used to coaching maybe like hour-long group sessions, maybe with, 8 to 10 kids possibly, where you'd have and you got time to do a warm-up and do some games, maybe for 5-10 minutes at the start, and then kind of work your way through. Whereas at this club I now work at, we are doing mainly at least for kind of slightly lower skilled players or more beginner players, we are doing group classes of 30 minutes for a maximum of 4 kids. So in terms of the numbers, that's great, because your kids are going to get, a little bit more kind of one-to-one attention, which is often one of the difficulties when you get into group class settings, is the coach just doesn't have enough time to go around and give people, a long period of time looking at their kind of technique and giving them specific advice. In group settings, we generally have to give, generic demonstrations of what's going on. So at least that gives a little bit more kind of specific advice for the kids. So that's good. And the 30-minute format, again, it's everything's super fast. I think this works better for specifically younger kids who maybe don't have that attention span of some of the older kids. So I find myself just getting straight into, what's the shot that we're working on that week, going straight into a little drill. And what I mean by drill is we're going to work on that shot and we're going to try and maybe hit it into a certain area, or there's a certain challenge, or you get points for certain things. And then we go into, a bit more game points based stuff towards the back half. But I know your sessions are a little bit different as well, which is quite interesting.
Yeah. I think on the adult spectrum of tennis lessons, longer is probably often desired. You don't want to go too long, but an hour is probably just about right. Maybe an hour and a half. And a lot of the sessions out there, especially if you're an intermediate, are designed exactly that. They're designed, at least when I run them, they're designed to give you a good feeling of, okay, so I've done a good hour of cardio now. I've done my exercise, and I've done it whilst having fun playing the sport that I'm currently enjoying. And tennis is great for that. Look out in the future, by the way, for a podcast I will be hosting soon about losing weight whilst playing tennis, and that is going to be very interesting. But anyway, these sorts of things are very important, and what you should expect from a coaching session if you're in a group scenario, especially as an adult, but this applies as well to kids, is not to have help on the technical aspects. So if you go along and you're like, I'm not quite sure I'm holding the racket right, well, we're still going to help you there. We're still going to make sure that you've got a generic idea of what to do with a shot and maybe where to hit it. But that's the key thing we're going to try and help you with in those group sessions, is always, what can you do when you're playing the game? How can we get you to play the game more? And then give you an opportunity to practice that whilst we can give advice. It's not technical advice, it's more tactical advice, really. And it's advice about being on court. That's what you can expect to get out of those group sessions, I always find. I don't know, do you find the same thing, Ben?
I certainly find the same thing. Yeah, in those hour-long sessions where you have more kids. It's just, you kind of just want them to try and understand the game itself, I think, as like a first point. And yeah, I certainly see like individual private lessons as more of a chance to focus on technical stuff. But while you've got a group of kids, it also makes more sense to, have a group dynamic in the kind of points and games and stuff that you're working on as well. Otherwise it kind of be a bit pointless if it was just like, okay, next person, this is how you hit the shot. Do this. Next person, you want to, like, tennis is often, an individual sport, but you want kids to also be able to learn kind of the social aspect as well, and also how the games work. So there's different things that go into it. But yes, I agree with that.
It's definitely about feeling a community around you as you play that sport, or especially as you're learning as well, because it certainly helps to build that confidence is when you've got people around you who are going through that same thing, and also understand it. And often as well, I find when I watch other people play tennis, that can often help me think better about how I'm playing tennis. So it's quite nice. You see a cue that a coach might give, and you see someone else do exactly what they've just said, and you go, oh, that's what you want it to look like. And you start to get a little bit of a better sense. But you beautifully segued us into individual lessons. So we're gonna move on over into the idea of what to expect in an individual lesson. Now, the first thing you can expect, and I'm going to start with the bad news, is the cost. So the average cost in the UK for a group session. Any guesses, Ben? It's not the question format this week, but go on, give it a guess.
Average cost for a group session.
Yeah, in the UK, Great British Pounds.
£15? I might go lower.
Oh God, no, way too high.
Too high?
Yeah. For a group session, this is a group session.
For an hour?
Yeah.
So it's like 10 or even below that.
It's below that. So the average cost in the UK, remember, you might be taking into account maybe some London prices, like southwest of England prices.
Or Australia prices.
There are areas, obviously, or Australia prices. Yeah, obviously, that's where you're living. Yeah, so if you take into account those sorts of places, yeah, it does bring that average up. But the average across the UK is about $7.50 an hour for a group tennis session. Okay, so you're thinking, oh, that's not bad money for doing an activity. There are cheaper sports, but that's not bad. Unfortunately, it does change dramatically when you're doing an individual lesson. So you've got to think about, from the point of view of the coach, making the same money that they were making for that group session, pretty much with you as an individual, because they're giving you all the focus and they're giving you all the technical help at the same time. So any guesses for the individual cost? Average in the UK for an hour, Great British Pounds. What do you reckon?
You'll probably weep when you hear what I say the price is over here, but I'll go with the UK first. Let's go with 25.
Bang on. Well done. Bang on.
Is it? All
Perfect.
Right.
Yeah, it's exactly that. That is the average across the UK. Now, funnily enough, that average is drawn up. So you'll find in a lot of places you might be paying, say, £20 an hour. But if you go to London, for example, then anything under £40 an hour is probably, that's just not going to happen. I'll be honest with you. London's a different planet. What is it in Australia?
Well, that would probably be the cost of half an hour over here.
Right.
It's roughly, well, because I'm in a city, it's more expensive. So generally from the clubs I've been at, it's between $70 and $80 for an hour, which is like £35, maybe even £40, maybe even slightly more than that. And that's for like your standard coach. If you've got like more advanced coaches, then it's like $100. So, and
this is it as well. This is definitely something to watch out for if you're booking in an individual tennis lesson with a coach. Is what sort of a coach are they? And you can normally tell this by the qualification they have. They might tell you on a website or their contact details and stuff like that. If they're a head coach of a club, they might be a little bit more advanced, and then that price rises. So obviously, as you see, it's like the equivalent in a tennis coaching world. The equivalent of a promotion is, I put my individual rate up. Sort of your promotion is, I get £5 extra an hour now, provided people pay that, of course. So that is unfortunately one thing to expect from individual coaching. Is it's not cheap, and it's not something that you can do all the time if you find finances are a little bit tighter. However, that doesn't mean they're not worth the value. And obviously, as a tennis coach, I will always advocate that they are worth the value. They are worth the cost of wherever they are most of the time. Sometimes there are some bad coaches, but that's not normal. So you should expect that you'll have a good coach. Anyway, so what to expect when you go to an individual tennis session? Well, I often find people, if you're a beginner or an intermediate, heck, you could even be an advanced player. I've seen a lot of people come to me. My first question when I meet you, my first question is, what is your name? But my second question, no, that's not a question. Hello.
How are you? This is great value.
My second question, thank you. Yes, that's the first 5 minutes. The second question I will always ask will be, what do you want to work on today? And most of the time it's, that is where we are trained. We are trained in that scenario, obviously, to pick the thing that we believe is your priority to playing better tennis in the future. The thing that you need to complete your view or build your view of being able to play the game better. So, for example, if you turned up to me and you'd never played tennis before, I wouldn't spend an hour with you serving. I actually think that would be insane. Unfortunately, some coaches might do that. If you're a beginner and you turn up with me, the first thing I'm going to do is, let's play a little bit in the short court. And I will just try and get you to rally back and forth with me. Because I guarantee a lot of us out there, if we've never tried a sport before, we've probably seen someone have a go at it. We probably have a basic understanding, okay, so the racket's got to go forwards. It's not going to smack our own heads with it. We're not, humans are quite intelligent. To begin with, you've just got to get a feel for it. And that's one of the most important things. And then we can start to build in advice when we see how confident you are in different scenarios. And that's one thing we're very good at as well, is creating the scenarios. So that's something to expect. What do you reckon, Ben?
Yeah, I think I used to, when I was coaching, maybe go in on the technical side too early as well. It's quite a good point that you make there. But like, you do find, even if you do, sometimes I might do like a little bit of like touch tennis or something as well, which is basically you just start it at the net, you drop it over, and then you've just got to hit it. Basically got to hit it up. The ball has to bounce, and then you just kind of see how they move and how they hit on both sides. Because naturally, I find like people do find a way to hit it that's not terrible, at least from right out of the start. And then you can kind of see like, then you have something to work from rather than like just giving them the generic few technical points, and then it's like, then they're like, there's too much information and stuff like that. So I think that's a good place to start. Ultimately, as you become as you progress, then you naturally yourself have a better idea of what you might need to work on, like week to week, and that's when like even more gains can start to be made. But I think like if you're just starting out with it, like starting off like in kind of the boxes and just seeing how you move and things like that is a good starting point. I don't know if there's anything else that I've missed out there.
No, absolutely, that's great. I think it's key to remember as well, if you're an intermediate and you turn up and you're like, well, I know how to play the game. I can go out there and I can play a set. I know how to score. I know how to hit all the shots, albeit I might make some mistakes. And you turn up and you don't quite know what you want to work on because you don't know the priority. That's also fine. You're allowed to do that. But also remember, you're the person paying for the value out of this coach. You want to squeeze every last drop basically out of that coach's hour that you possibly can. So if you do go along and you're like, well, they keep hitting it to my backhand and I keep losing after they do it, maybe we should work on backhand. And then so instantly my brain goes, well, I'm not going to think about watching the rest of your shots now. I'm just going to think about creating scenarios where you're going to hit that backhand so I can see what's happening. Once I've seen it, I can then start to build a session for you, and I can build something pretty much on the spot that will address the very issue. What to expect. If you're going to work on something in a tennis session, and this is where you've got to have a little bit of an awareness. So this is probably my biggest tip for going into an individual tennis lesson, is when you're going into that lesson, make sure that the coach does not give you too many different options when they're giving you advice. So for example, if you're working on your backhand and they say, you got to do this with your legs, but make sure you do this with your arm. How's that grip working out? Do you want to just twist it around in your hand? If you have all of these things bombarding you at one time, I guarantee not one of them will go in. What you want is a coach who focuses on one single thing. And you can say that as well. Sometimes we get a little bit carried away. Sometimes we think, we can see all these things. Our brains are working away. And we're like, yep, okay, I know that they need to do that, that, and that in order to become Roger Federer. But we're not aiming in an hour for you to become Roger Federer or Serena Williams. We're aiming for you to improve the shot so that you can go away and go, okay, it's no longer a weakness. Or I know I can confidently go and practice this now and make it better. So that's one thing to be aware of, is make sure you know that you only need to think about one thing. I guarantee there's always just one thing that will massively improve the way you hit a shot. Yeah,
and also the coach isn't going to do all the thinking for you. Like, you do have to actually like consciously try and engage with it. Like, you are ultimately having a lesson, so you are trying to learn, which means it's not going to be easy. Just because you've paid someone to do it doesn't mean that like you don't have to do any work from that point onwards. You do have to like consciously engage with it. And another word about like the value, I think the lessons become more valuable as you start to progress a bit more. I think when you start out, like, group lessons are like a fine, because you're really at the early stages and you can pick up quite a lot from a session like that. But then if you want to speed up the process of learning, which is I think the key point, then you've got to think of it as like, if I'm paying £7.50 for a group class every week, but and that might take me, I don't know, 4 or 5 weeks to improve by X amount. Maybe instead I can get one private lesson for £25, and in 2 weeks or even 1 week I've improved X amount. So you're trying to speed up that process, and that's where I think the value, the way you got to think about the value of the actual lesson is speeding up that process and not taking months and months in group sessions to make the same progress that you would make in like 1 or 2 lessons.
Yeah, and tennis is one of the hardest sports in the world, so it's very easy to get something technically not necessarily wrong. Wrong's never the right word to use here, and coaches that do shouldn't. But it's more about, you might get something technically that's not going to go the way you think it is, and it's not going to give you the shot that you're aiming to hit, for example. So having another pair of eyes, that's very important. And in a group session, it's hard for us. It's impossible for us to give you the advice you need to improve, say, that shot or generic things and technique. They're more about providing you with an opportunity to play, sort of like capability people on that tennis court, and providing you drills where you can practice the things. I always used to love to think of it that you have maybe one individual lesson. And this is the other thing as well. Some people think they have to have like 2 individual lessons a week or something like that. No, you absolutely do not. I actually think you probably would benefit from not doing that. To be quite honest, in my head, once a month is a great amount of lessons to have, provided you're going away and able to practice and put that into practice, either in another group session, just hitting with a friend, or say you've worked on serving in your individual lesson, going away and just serving some balls. Having that practice time is just as important as the lesson, so it doesn't always need to be expensive.
Yeah, like we talked about before from the research, combining lessons with practice is the quickest way to improve, rather than just doing lessons or just doing practice.
Absolutely.
There we go. All right. So yeah, key tips there really are, if you're a beginner starting out, then you're probably fine just going with group classes at the start. But then as you progress to like an intermediate level, then you might want to start complementing the group classes, maybe with a private or individual lesson once every few weeks or something, and trying to practice a bit more outside of that. And that's where you really start to unlock the value and speed up that process of learning, which is kind of the key point here. We want to get better, but we want to get better in a shorter period of time. Alrighty.
Right.
If you enjoyed that one, give us a follow on the different podcast platforms, and on YouTube, subscribe, share it around if you feel like it, and we will see you in the next one.